after the fight, Khabib called and immediately said, look, when you had his back, why didn't you transition to
mount
the top
Yeah.
and mount? Yeah.
не подумал. Ну, такие подсказки нужны, чтобы
And he said, yeah, and now thinking about it, like I saw Volkanovski move in this direction, and why didn't they do it?
If you watch the interview of Volkanovski, where he's talking about what he was saying when he was on his back.
Then I started mouthing off to him, just saying, come on, mate, you said you'll finish me. You're just going to hang on. You're just trying to survive.
He was talking trash about him just sitting there on his back. I honestly think that him talking to Islam messed with Islam's mind, dude. Top to bottom organizational corruption. Oh, sorry, I thought you asked what the fact that Islam has been completely exonerated in the IV scandal proves about the UFC organization. So before anybody throws anything at their computer or any Islam fans get really mad at me in the comments, why don't you just sit tight and let me explain what I'm talking about, because this is not necessarily an attack on Islam. It's actually not an attack on Islam. It is not really necessarily an attack on the UFC exactly. It just demonstrates something that people have hypothesized about as UFC fans, because there's just no other way to explain what this situation demonstrates. There just isn't, you know. And I'll get into it and I'll explain exactly what I mean. And then also I'll show you guys some stuff from Islam Makhachev's post-fight interview where he was answering questions in Russian. And I had my buddy who runs the Accent podcast translate some of it. I talked about that briefly on my live stream, but I just never assumed people actually watch my live stream. So I'll talk about it on this video later in the video also. Later today, I'm going to put out a video about Conor McGregor responding to some accusations about him kicking people off of the show. I've got some info there. And that's basically what I got for you guys. If I can finish this interview that I have a very special video coming, but it's very labor intensive. So we'll see what happens if I can get it out today. But anyway, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Gentlemen's agreement. I do the videos. You subscribe to the channel if you're going to watch them, and we're good to go. My analytics show that you guys did that. Like I said in my last video, my subscribers who watch my channel went up 25% once I started asking you guys to do it. So thank you guys very much. Anyway, okay, so here's the deal. So Jeff Novitzky came out and publicly exonerated Islam Makhachev for the entire thing on the IV, right? And so I don't think anybody needs a recap, but bottom line is Dan Hooker came out, said that they had evidence that Islam Makhachev had taken an IV to rehydrate, and immediately everyone went on the defensive. Islam's team initially denied it. Ali Abdelaziz put that tweet up that said that fighters are actually allowed to IV rehydrate as long as a nurse administers it. It's up to 2 to 3 liters. Turns out it was actually 100 milliliters per 12 hours. And so there's all this confusion there, but it wasn't really an admission. You know, it didn't actually say that Islam had done it. So one thing that everybody should have learned from this before we even get into the fact that he has now been officially exonerated is when you get accused of something, okay, shut up. And that goes for anyone who's around you. That goes just boot. Like watch television, watch these detective shows. Watch some scandals that you guys have seen in the press that seem like you had people dead to rights, and watch how it happens when people do not talk, when they just don't say anything. Like there is essentially nothing to gain most of the time unless it looks like a statement is required. And most of the time it isn't, right? So as an example, in this case, Volkanovski's manager ended up going on Ariel's show 2 days later and straight up said, well, here's what our evidence was, but as you can see, it's not really conclusive. And it's like, well, that changes things. You know what I mean? Like, that certainly changes things. And he's like, and by the way, I actually told Dan Hooker not to go public with this information. And you're like, oh, well, now we're going to have to kind of lean towards Islam. And it's like, yeah, but it does seem like maybe their team misunderstood the rule because his manager tweeted out something that they were allowed to IV rehydrate, you know? And it's like, yeah, but was Ali Abdelaziz in Perth? They're like, no. You're like, so what are we talking about? What are we talking about? Ali tweeted out something defending his own fighter and he wasn't even there. That's not an admission, but nonetheless, you know, lots of back and forth. Sounded like it's solid, then it's not solid. This made it look bad, this, whatever. Bottom line, okay? Here's what we actually learned, though, is that the Australian Combat Sports Commission had completely outlawed any use of IVs to rehydrate at all. There's no amount that you're allowed to use per per the Australian Combat Sports Commission. And what I also learned, you know, I mean, because that's what was really interesting about this is I'm learning how, you know, what governing bodies are kind of in charge. You're like, okay, so like, is USADA in charge? Because USADA has these rules about rehydration. UFC changes the rules. And apparently it sounds like this rehydration thing where you're allowed to rehydrate is for guys who are not active. It actually has nothing to do with people who are actually competing. That's what it sounded like when Dana explained it or Jeff explained it. So, you know, it's kind of like, all right, I can't make heads or tails. But then the Australian Commission just said, you know what? There's not enough evidence to do anything with this. He's exonerated. The case is closed. And Jeff Novinsky goes, case is closed, guys. There's not enough evidence. So case closed. Case closed. Now, what do we learn from that? Okay. If Jeff Novinsky is coming out and publicly stating that Islam has been exonerated because the Australian Commission has exonerated him, then what that means is that commission is clearly in charge of popping people dirty. You know, they're the ones who are going to, or at the very least, if they determine that someone has done something wrong, then they are the governing body that determines that something. I mean, it's not like, you know, it's not like USADA couldn't pop someone also, but clearly that commission has to say that someone did not do anything wrong. Okay. So it seems like they are, at the very least, one of the two that could be the top of the pyramid that's determining guilt. Okay, so how does that mean anybody is corrupt? Okay, simple, very, very simple. And I will thank the Weasel for this because in his video, so I did the video. I'm pretty sure I was the first one that put out the video that was like, hey, by the way, you can't even use a drop of IV rehydration. So about 3 hours later, the Weasel did his. Quoted the same rule, and then it's like, yeah, but if you read a little bit further, here's what the rest of that rule says. It says that per that commission, you're not allowed to use a sauna to cut weight. You're not allowed to use a sweatsuit to cut weight. And you're also not allowed to use IV rehydration. I think there's even some weird language of any kind of risky stuff to dehydrate yourself to make weight. Okay, so how do we know that there is corruption top to bottom in the organization based on them exonerating Islam? Simple. It means that their rules don't mean anything. If they're the governing body and those are their rules, raise your hand if you believe that every fighter who cut weight in Australia knew that the sauna is not allowed to be used and also knew that sweatsuits are not allowed to be used, and then they adhered to that rule. Raise your hand if you believe that. Right? I'm waiting. You telling me that none of the fighters used sweatsuits? None of them used sweet sweat, put on a sweatsuit, cut weight. None of them used saunas. None of them. None of them. None of them used any of these dangerous methods to cut weight. None of them. Come on, dude. Come on. That's an absurd. I mean, if you know anything about the UFC and how guys cut weight, first of all, it's an absurd rule. It's an absurd rule. So if you have rules that no one's going to follow, then what rule, how do you determine which rule matters, right? Like if they're like, hey, look, dude, listen. So I know it's a little bit unorthodox, but in Australia, you're not allowed to walk with 2 feet into the octagon. You have to hop on only your right leg. And you're like, hey man, did you read this? It says you can only hop on your right leg into the octagon. They're like, weird. Is everybody doing that? They're all, no, everybody's just walking in. You're all, yeah, I mean, yeah, that's weird. And so as soon as you have some stupid rule that no one's going to follow in there, then which rule is important? Do you know what I mean? Like, what if everybody's going to break this rule except for the heavyweights, then what rule matters? How does the IV one? So in this one, you can't use even a drop of IV. Well, you're also not allowed to use sauna or sweatsuit, okay? So if the UFC is supposedly adhering to specific combat sports commission's rules when they go to different regions, well, no, they're not. No, they're not, because no one would adhere to that, okay? No one would adhere to no saunas and no sweatsuits, right? I mean, not no one, but if you're telling me every single person on the roster adhered to that, come on, dude. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. You know, is it possible that a couple guys knew the rule and they just put on, 10 sweatshirts and ran around? Sure. But is it more likely that everyone was like, how are they going to know if we use a sweatsuit to cut weight, right? And they just did what they always do. Yeah, probably. Okay. And so the bottom line is this, dude. Did Islam get proven that he didn't use an IV? Of course not. Did it get proven that he didn't use an IV? No. Do I care whether he used an IV? No. I actually learned something. I did an episode with the 10-7 podcast, which is a dude who's a fan of the channel, and Justin from Extreme Couture. You go watch. I posted a link to it on my what do you call it? On my community page. And Justin is a UFC fighter, and he was telling me that IV rehydration can actually work against you. See, like I don't know this shit. You know what I mean? I've never cut weight like that. And he said that like he cut down to, I believe he said 45. And he went and he put on 40 pounds through IV rehydration. I can't even make heads or tails of that. I'm like, dude, like, I didn't want to dig too deep into the weeds on it, but I was like, damn, dude, like, so 40 pounds. Like, so, I mean, I understand like your body will just hold on to any drop of liquid that gets put into it. But man, like, and he said he was so sluggish in there, like it seriously hurt his performance. I just really think that there has to be some kind of actual scientific method where you can figure out what the right amount of weight is to cut given your specific body type and how you perform, etc. And then the weight you want to come back up to when you fight. Like this kind of like old school, just cut as much as you can and then rehydrate as much as you can. That can't be optimal for performance. But I mean, look, bottom line is, if you're not following all the rules, then the whole thing is corrupt, right? Now, if the rules are stupid, which I think they're completely stupid. Like, let me just make perfectly clear. I think not using saunas to cut weight is idiotic, is stupid, completely stupid. I think not being able to use a sweatsuit is stupid. I think not being able to use an IV to rehydrate is stupid. I don't think they're good rules at all. But if they're rules, and then you have Novitzky who's going to come out and go, hey, listen, man, they ran the investigation, no evidence. So, and he's deferring to this commission who has rules that are unenforceable and stupid. And he's like, look, guys, come on. Is there any evidence? No. Let's just, come on. Are we really going to suspend Islam Makhachev for 2 years? Like, let's make this thing go away. Now, I'm actually, you know what? Actually, this is what I want to do. You know what? I take this back. I'm going to put a poll. I put in the comments if you had to guess whether or not Islam used an IV to rehydrate, and then say yes or no. And then if yes, say whether or not you care. So now one last thing too. I wanted to show you guys this clip of Islam answering a question in Russian that I thought was really interesting.
Пытался наверх перейти. И я вот сейчас подумал еще.
He said, look, when after the fight, Khabib called and immediately said, look, when you had his back, why didn't you transition to I guess to the top,
Yeah.
Mount, yeah.
Волконовский уходил на эту сторону. Почему я не подумал? Ну, такие подсказки нужны. Что
And he said, yeah, and now thinking about it, like I saw Volkanovski move in this direction, and why didn't they do it? And this type of advice is needed during the fight.
100% роль Хабиба в углу, она неоценима. Это человек, который знает много вещей.
Of course, Khabib in the corner is priceless.
What was it like to not have Khabib there? And he said that he talked to Khabib right after the fight, and Khabib told him immediately, he said, in the fourth, why did you just stay on his back, and why didn't you move in transition to mount? And Islam was like, he's like, and I realized, of course I should have done that. Like, in hindsight, it's like, man, so having him there would have been priceless. Or, super valuable, whatever. And like I said in my live stream, if you watch the interview of Volkanovski, where he's talking about what he was saying when he was on his back, he was talking trash about him just sitting there on his back. I honestly think that him talking to Islam messed with Islam's mind, dude.
I don't feel like he was trying to look for the finish there. I think he knew that I'd be very hard to submit. He just wanted to make sure he didn't lose a position, make sure he stayed in a dominant position. But obviously I was trying to rev the crowd up, rev myself up, try and get in his head a little bit. And then I started mouthing off to him, just saying, come on, mate, you said you'll finish me. You're just going to hang on. You're just trying to survive.
Because he's specifically saying, oh, look at you now. You're just holding on for dear life. You're just holding on for dear life. He's baiting him to transition to another position. and Islam didn't do it, when Islam himself and Khabib are both saying, like, what were you doing? Why didn't you transition? I don't know how to read that other than, Volkanovski talking trash, potentially getting Islam to stay in one position where he potentially would have, tried to move over to mount. Like, he either intimidated him or, listen, in hindsight, he won the fight and he needed that round. So it probably ended up being a good strategic move, because if he moves to mount, it's not like that's a risk-free transition, obviously. He's just to let go of a body triangle that is not, that's not going anywhere. That's not going anywhere. You get that thing locked, they're not going anywhere, man. Every time you see someone lock a body triangle on someone's back, you just basically go, all right, well, I guess this is where the round's going to end. Either they're going to choke them, or, I would say 7 out of 10 times, if they don't choke them, the round ends with them still attached to their back. That's just how it goes, because that's such a powerful position. But anyway, I thought that was really notable. I like the fact that Khabib called him right afterwards. I like what Khabib said about, it was like an actual tactical thing. It's like he called him and he goes, like, how you feeling? How was the fight? Khabib calls right after the fight, and he doesn't say, hey, congratulations. He doesn't say, hey, man, what about, he says straight up tactical advice immediately. And I think that's pretty cool. And I also think it's pretty cool that Volkanovski talked him out of moving to mount. I don't see how else you could read that. Look at that. I'm thinking this stuff on the spot. Anyway, that's what I got. I'm going to do this video about Conor responding to accusations about Tough, and then I'm going to get back to editing. I love you guys. Peace.